everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and welcome to a special program with our good friend Riley Waggaman, aka Edward Slavsquat himself. And here he is back in Moscow, Russia, and we're delighted to be able to reconnect. Riley, it's so good to have you back. Thank you for joining me again. And how are you today?
John, thank you so much for having me back on. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. I always enjoy it. I'm doing well. I'm back in my Moscow suburb and just readjusting to Russian life, and things are okay. Can't complain.
Russian life sounds like reminds me of the old song Moscow Nights.
Mm.
Are you out dancing in the moonlight with all the babushkas?
That sounds it sounds much more exciting than my current daily routine, but maybe I can make it happen.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're there, and let's start by just recounting your journey since we you were in Moscow. I think what is it, 6 months ago when you left on a visa issue, and just bring us through your travels up to today from there.
Well, actually, I left Moscow more than a year ago.
Oh
Actually,
wow.
I left Moscow in June of 2022. And the original plan was to just stop in Georgia and get a new visa. But me being me, I didn't really research this very well. And it turns out that Georgia is absolutely the worst possible place you can go to try to get a visa for Russia because, first of all, there's no Russian consulate in Georgia. You have to do it through, I believe, the embassy of Switzerland or something like that. And secondly, you need to be a resident. You have to have residency in Georgia in order to apply for a Russian visa in Georgia. So then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna stay in Georgia and I'm gonna get residency, which you can do if you work. So I got this job working at an English school for a few months, and I got the paperwork. And then on some stupid technicality, they didn't give me residency, so that was a big waste of time. And then I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm going to Czechia. I'm going to the Czech Republic. I got my visa in Prague, and then I made my way back to Moscow. So it's been a long, needlessly long journey. It's mostly my fault. I'm very bad. I don't I hate um like I have a deep hatred for this idea that I need documents to do basic things live where my family is or walk across an imaginary border. And so I become very there's I know it's very it's sort of self-destructive, and I'm just harming myself, but I have this sort of gag reflex towards engaging in this process, so I always drag my feet whenever it comes to the paperwork, right? The mindless stamping and signatures and background checks and you know all that stuff I just find repulsive. So
Well, I just think it's part of our genetic inheritance that we should be able to walk freely wherever we wish to, and that the any inhibition of that, along with all of our other inherent freedoms, it takes away from our life. It makes us feel a little bit less than what we could be. And I read about that in many contexts, but what you say isn't very. It's an interesting example. It's one which, for some reason, I never encountered. As young person, I saw my dad getting a passport and flying to Europe or something. I said, "Oh, well, that's how you go to Europe. You get a passport."
right.
I hadn't, no, I wasn't probably even less than 10 years ago when I suddenly realized that passports were a invention of, I guess, the 18th or 19th century. Before that, there wasn't any such thing. And, they're just ways to control borders and populations, and the beginning of what we're looking at now with digital IDs.
Yeah, well, even our modern conception of the international passport system is actually comes from World War One, right? It was this it
True.
was supposed to be a temporary document to keep out people, draft dodgers and unwanted refugees. And then the League of Nations said, well, like we still need this. In fact, they even cited for epidemiological reasons because of the so-called Spanish flu. They said, well, now we need some way somehow to keep track of people. And they just never, it was supposed to be temporary. They said it would be temporary. They kept promising it would be temporary. And now we have an international passport system. And, before 1914, actually, in almost every country in the world, with very few exceptions, you could travel freely there. You didn't need to show a document. You didn't need to go through some sort of interrogation process or explain why you were there. And now we're treated, with the passport system, we started being treated like criminals. Everyone was a suspect, a potential suspect, potential criminal, and now everyone is a potential biohazard, right? So it's interesting how, well, it's not interesting. It's very sad how we continue to dehumanize ourselves through this system of paperwork and documents. And you know I'm a human. I don't think I need to show anyone a document to prove that I'm a human. I don't think there's any reason to suspect me of anything. I would just like to go to this other place and visit my friends or family. Very strange that that's somehow a very radical idea.
It is, though, and that's part of the psychological conditioning we've been put through since that very period. With propaganda, Edward Bernays, and all of the psychological warfare that's been played upon us through the media and commercialization of everything. Well, you make your point is I completely agree with you, and it's something that the American people just don't have on the radar screen. We thought, well, sure, you need a passport. Well, how how could you how could you just have open borders? That would be crazy. Of course, we practically have an open border with Mexico right now,
Well,
and
right, yeah.
is that crazy or not? That it's it's all a question of why do you want to stop immigrants? And the only reason I think we want to stop immigrants is that they are not geared to actually assimilate into the American culture. They're not given a tradition that somehow this is what's happening. Like in my case, I say, I had high school education. We did have American history. We had a whole year in government, quote unquote, taught by the football coach, of course. But, you
Nice.
know, but the idea was, you have this civics obligation and at least acknowledge it before you get out of high school. Then I went to college and ended up majoring in the subject of government at William and Mary. So I became very acutely aware of the power and importance of understanding what governments do and how they get formed and under what's the philosophy behind this. And then I went into the work world, and well, then I went to law school, and emphasized the importance of understanding the process. I'm in Washington D.C. going to Georgetown Law School, and half my teachers are government workers. Like I had a wonderful teacher, was the head of the attorney for the Teamsters Union.
Wow.
So these people are very deeply connected, and I see how the strings and the power and all that, at least at that point. But most people have been disassociated from the connections, the sinews of government, to the point now that they're just willing to accept that everything's okay right now in my life, and that's all I need to know. It's just too much for me to try to wade into the actual content of public policy because, well, I don't know. It's just too hard. It's just too hard. I got other things to do. And they've forced that situation on us so that, the ideas behind the American Revolution and behind the idea of a constitution and a republic and democracy and liberty and human rights, Well, they all get fuzzy and confused, and people are no longer able to carry on that mission that was set for this generation. And the generation we call the greatest generation, my parents, they had it. They understood that they had to pass on the torch. And we now, my generation is now dying out, and we need to pass on the torch. And of course, that's what I'm trying to do. But who else is there? You know, 99% of the people are not going to pay attention. Not right now. It's just too hard. It's too difficult for people to pay attention. But sorry for the rant, but I think that's that idea of, yeah, my instincts are that I'm free, that I can cross that line. Why? It's just a line in the sand, doesn't mean anything. I can walk from here into that next space, and it's just a natural thing. I have at least should have by the time of my maturity some freedom of speech to offer my opinion about things. But no, they don't let us do that. YouTube has practically shut me down many times, and by the way, I'm still on YouTube on my two remaining channels just to keep in touch with people. But please sign up for McDuff Lives, all one word, on Rumble, because you never know when they're going to cut the cord on me at YouTube. Which reminds me, you are no longer on Twitter. What's that about?
Well, Twitter is blocked in Russia, and
Oh.
the VPN that I used to use, NordVPN, doesn't work in Russia, which is insane. I don't know how that's even possible. And also, look, I don't, this is not I'm not trying to talk down to anyone. I understand the value and the benefits of being on social media. It's just not for me. I came to this point where I realized every day that I'm not on Twitter is a better day for me. And for some people, I understand the value of it. I understand the benefits. I understand, we make a lot of fun of networking, but networking has value. There's a purpose to it. It's good to be in touch with either friends or colleagues or like-minded individuals. I get it. But you know, more and more, I like running a tight ship. I like protecting my noodle. I'm very strict with the information that I expose myself to. So I try to be very careful with, what the kind of internet sludge that I come in contact with. And Twitter is just it's too schizo for me, I have to say.
When you are focused on content you do desire to find, how do you describe that content? What are you primarily interested in gaining from internet contact?
Well, this is the thing. I guess I should elaborate. It's not that I'm trying to protect myself from, information that might be inconvenient to me. I read a lot of that kind of stuff. It's just that, in my line of work, which I'm Russia focused, right? I have a very sort of I've got my own beat, not so long ago, people who wrote things usually had a very very specific topic that they would cover, right? You had like the guy covering the murders and the crimes hanging out in front of the courthouse, giving cops cigarettes to find out what's going on. You had the other journalists. I still really believe in this concept because I think that in order to cover a topic really well, you really, really have to narrow your focus. And for me, it's Russia. And to be very blunt, English language Twitter, and Twitter is predominantly English language, not a whole lot of Russian language content, although there is some, uh, does not have anything to offer me as far as I'm concerned when it comes to my particular focus. I think the Russia coverage in English language on Twitter is appalling and hurts my brain just reading it because it's so disconnected from reality. And I say that because I spend my whole day reading Russian language media written by Russians inside Russia, and you could not imagine two different universes that have almost no relation to one another. And so the question Like, the question that you have to ask yourself is, why is this, and why should I waste my time reading what Americans think is happening in Russia when I could just read what Russians know is happening in Russia, right? It's like, I think I only have so much time in a day. I want to spend time with my son. I want to play piano. I want to do walk in the forest. I think I'm just going to go with what the Russians are saying, right? So, yeah, that's my reasoning.
I just got a piano, man. I'm so
Oh,
excited.
nice. What kind of
It's
piano, John?
it's a Yamaha C3.
Oh, sweet.
It is a 7 foot 9 inch grand,
Nice.
and it is just the most amazing instrument. I never had a real piano before. I did study piano a bit when I was younger, but then life happened and I got away from it, and so I haven't been in shape for a long time. But I always wanted to get back to it, and then my best friend, my old college roommate, had a relative that had to give up her piano. She had to go into assisted living, and so they ended up with this piano, but they didn't play and they didn't use it. So he, we were talking, and I said, I one day I want to get a piano. He said, well, you can have this one. I said, are you serious? This is like a $10,000 instrument or
Oh,
something.
yeah, definitely, at
Yeah, I
least.
mean, yeah, at least. And so, but the next thing I know, he's arranged with a piano mover and comes up here, and I got it in end of July, and oh, I mean, it's almost perfectly in tune. I haven't had it tuned yet, but oh, it's such a joy. So you play too. I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, yeah, it's my I should have followed my heart and become a traveling pianist. I think that was my real purpose in life, is to just, be like the hurdy-gurdy man in the street, but just travel to bars with pianos and something like that. I don't know. I love piano, and I love I mean, yeah, like classical music in general. I'm very, very, very close to my heart. I'm a big Johann Sebastian Bach disciple. I'm always preaching. I'm telling people all you have to do is listen to Bach, and your life will improve. I guarantee it. Like, just listen to Bach. Just stop what you're doing and listen to Johann Sebastian Bach. What kind of music do you like listening to or playing on the piano, John?
Wait a minute. I have to first
Oh.
get in my American cultural reference from the great TV series MASH and say, ah, Bach. Radar O'Reilly himself. And speaking of Rileys,
you
that was
know,
old. Did you ever watch MASH with
you know, I
Alan Alda and Gary, whatever his name was, that
I
played
I
Radar O'Reilly?
I think I only saw a few episodes of it, but I love the film. Like,
Yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
original film is so good. It's a classic. I might watch that tonight. Oh, I love that film. It's so good. It's
It
so
really
it's
is.
so it's so dark, but somehow also heartwarming, and it's just got everything. I
I know.
laugh and laugh watching that film. Yeah.
Oh, we should get together and watch some good old movies from back in.
Yeah, we should. By the way, I'll be in the States. I'm coming to the States in
Oh,
December to visit my family. I'll be in North Carolina. Where
oh
you're in
no.
Maryland, right?
Yeah. What part of North Carolina?
Southport. Do you know where that is? It's
No.
like it's like maybe 45 minutes from Wilmington, something like
Oh
that.
shit. I can find that. All
We
right.
should we should rendezvous. It'd be fun. That'd be great
Just
fun.
without any doubt, man. I mean, name the place, I'll be there. Or you come up here to Mystery Island. I mean, it's just
Yeah,
a little bit north. Yeah, you'd like it here.
it's a
Oh
deal.
God, that's exciting. What's your date window in November sometime?
So I
Just send me a
arrive.
note.
Yeah, I arrived December 1st in Boston, and I'm moving around the States visiting family and friends, and I should be there I think I'll leave, like, the first week in January to come back, to Russia, so
All
or
right,
to co yeah, so anyway,
all right. Well, we'll leave the porch light on for you.
excellent, excellent.
Now let's get back to your specialty, which is Russia. And you've been doing an awful lot of reading of Russian media. You're getting your finger on the pulse of what's really truly going on in Russia. And of course, we in America are just covered over with dreck that we don't understand, and getting all of this manipulation of our minds, which doesn't tell us anything about what's really going on in Russia. So help us out. Tell us what's on your mind as the top issues that Russia is facing.
Well, it's hard to know where to begin. I mean, I feel like we could pick a, you know, a hot button issue and really dive into it, but I would say what I'm really thinking a lot about recently, although I haven't written very much about it, but it's always on the top of my mind, is Russia has a presidential election coming up next year, right? In I believe April of next year, April or May. If I hope I'm not getting that wrong. And I think that Russia right now is in a situation where there is potential for a lot of uncertainty on the home front. Just there's like a lot of, and I'm not saying that I think that we're approaching a 1917 scenario or anything like that, but I am saying that I do feel like um, there es- because of the situation in Ukraine and that it is still unresolved and there doesn't seem to be any kind of solution to this conflict that can be achieved in the next 6 months unless there's some sort of agreement that's signed, you know, shortly, which maybe is possible. Uh, there's going to be some unhappiness inside Russia because a lot of promises were made, a lot of things have changed inside Russia, some things for the good, some things for the bad. Uh, Obviously, for the average Russian, just like for the average American or the average Brazilian, a lot of what determines whether you're satisfied with the situation in your country is economic. Um, I don't think that the situation is catastrophic in Russia, by no means. But we should remember that just like in the United States, about a quarter of Russia's population lives in or near poverty, which is always bad and is always unacceptable. Russia, incredibly, has a problem with rising fuel prices, which sounds insane and is almost inconceivable. But what happened, John, is that Russia started mass exporting all of its fuel uh, to mostly like India and China. And as a result, there's like actual, in some parts of the country, there's actually been reported fuel shortages, which again sounds insane. But again, I'm just quoting Russian media. And the problem with the price hikes, of course, is that this exacerbates inflationary problems, and there are in fact inflationary problems. The dollar, it's like a we're hovering around 100 rubles to a dollar. And again, I want to stress I have a nuanced take on this. There are advantages and disadvantages to having, what would be just considered a weak ruble when compared to the dollar. It's good for the budget because if you're selling oil or other products abroad, exporting products abroad, and you're making dollars, your budget is in rubles. So you convert those dollars into rubles, you have more money for the budget. That's good. The problem is Russia still imports a lot of things. And even the things that they make domestically, they depend on foreign components or some sort of foreign material. You have to buy these materials or products in foreign currency. Very, very few countries are going to be accepting rubles right now. And that means prices go up. Prices have gone up. I've definitely noticed it. Just perusing the local grocery store, talking to other Russians, even like friends in Russia who are not Russian but have lived here for many years. I mean, inflation is a problem, just like it is everywhere else in the world. And so, I mean, I guess what I would say is that I think that again, I don't want to I'm not trying to dramatize it. I'm not trying to say that I'm expecting imminent catastrophe or some sort of apocalyptic event, but the upcoming presidential election combined with, I would say, definitely some economic uncertainties, as well as very, very, I mean, it goes beyond social, like internal social, I don't want to say unrest, but uneasiness. It's more like we've been in this conflict in Ukraine for more than a year. Unfortunately, the stated goals have not yet been achieved. Russians understand this. Russians have been dying in this war. So have Ukrainians, of course. Russians have been forcibly conscripted into fighting in this war. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of people who want peace. They want a return to, I guess, what you can call the old normal or whatever, right? I mean, they basically want stability. Russia's, in fact, you could say that the Putin government is its you I would say that its greatest asset was the promise of stability, and things are less stable now. They just are. Just it's just a objective reality. And so Russians understand this, and I would say above all else, Russians value stability. And if you can't offer them stability, and if you offer them promises or pledges that that I don't think can actually be fulfilled at this point, this causes problems, right? And so how this actually plays out in the coming months, I'm not even going to give a prediction. I really don't know, John. Everything could go smoothly. Who knows? But this is definitely something that has been on the back of my mind. Um, and we'll see what happens. So, yeah, it's sort of a large picture, what I'm looking at in the future, sort of analysis, I guess.
The country that lives on Gazprom has run out of gas.
I know it sounds unbelievable, John. And I haven't written about it yet because I'm still like in shock. And there were these promises, this problem actually started in July with these fuel price hikes. And Russia is very much like the United States in the sense that you don't have a lot of like you're not going to people don't take it's such a big country. People are driving cars, right? If you don't have a car, you're not going very far in Russia. You're staying in your town, you're staying in your village. Maybe you can somehow get a bus to Moscow and then take a plane somewhere. I mean, it's like the United States. So so any kind of rise in fuel prices is a big problem. And as I mentioned, I mean, I just saw this statistic. This is an official statistic, John, from Rosstat, which is the official federal statistics agency. It was something like 20% of Russians make 19,000 rubles, which in if we're going to convert that into dollars right now, that's like maybe a little more than $200 a month.
Oh,
And let me tell you something, you can't live on $200 a month. I mean, you can, but you're eating bread and butter, right? And so this is what I'm talking about. Like any kind of like even if we're talking about a few rubles, right? A liter of petrol goes up 2 or 3 rubles. Doesn't seem so bad if you have dollars, but if you're making 19,000 rubles a month, no, it's devastating. So again, I how this happened exactly, I'm still researching this. Like I still don't understand how it happened really. Like I've read the sort of the synopsis. Like, well, we were focusing on exports and we forgot about the fact that we have a population of 140 million people who use cars. I don't know. Like I don't know how they justify it. But there were promises from the government. Sorry, getting back to my original point. Starting in July or maybe in August, I believe it was the Ministry of Energy said, "Look, we're taking care of it. We're gonna find some way to fix it." I don't know if it's been fixed actually. And in fact, what's really scary, John, and this is also something that I haven't written about yet because it also seems too crazy to be true. So I have to research it more. But the Minister of Agriculture, who is actually the son, is this guy Patrushev, who's the son of the head of Russia's Security Council, I believe. Anyway, this guy came out and said the problem with fuel prices is that now our farmers can't afford fuel for their agricultural vehicles, and this actually is endangering our ability to harvest food like in the coming months. And he literally, I mean, he said this publicly. This is an article from TASS or RIA Novosti in Russian. I was shocking. Like, it's really scary, the potential for, serious problems. And so I don't know. I have to look into this again. I don't know really how serious it's going to be, but yeah, it's strange also how you don't really somehow this information never really gets into the English language media space, even though everyone's always talking about Russia.
Interesting. I could just add that I believe that they have spent down all of our fuel reserve. The American big under Trump, we bought a whole bunch of oil and put it into our national reserve, and I think that they've spent that down in order to keep our consumers happy, which generally we are. Our gas prices have been comfortably controlled for us. So that's not happening, at least not as much as should be or could be in Russia right now. And that's another thing, is that the people see it. In this country, we have so much dreck thrown at us through the media that they don't see it. That they
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
They just don't see the connection between who's the president or what's the policy and the price of oil. It's all just accept it as long as it's affordable. And if it's affordable for
Exactly.
most people that have to use it, then the rest of us are going to have to suffer with it,
Yep.
even if our incomes are not enough to actually buy the fuel. As you point out, it's not nowhere near that bad in this country, but the same principle easily could apply here. We have lots of threats to our crops, from crazy weather events and to all kinds of environmental disasters. So yeah, the food supply is being threatened all around the world, I believe, and that is a dark agenda that people need to face.
Yes. Yes. I think you're absolutely right. I think that there is something is going on with the supply chain, and specifically with food. And I personally, I think possibly the conflict in Ukraine, whether intentionally or not, is obviously exacerbating this problem with grain shipments and other things like that. And I feel like we're setting the stage for what could potentially become an increasingly um, scary situation, right? With food security all around the world. And, I always was under the assumption, Russia has this policy of import substitution, which started about 10 years ago when the first food sanctions, EU imposed these sanctions on exporting food to Russia, like cheese and stuff like that, after the original Ukraine crisis in 2014. And so this policy of import substitution was supposed to make Russia more reliable. And I always worked under the assumption, and I think most Russians did, that at least in two areas, energy and food, Russia was basically completely independent. And I mean, on paper, it's true. But when you think about that, prices fuel prices are rising because apparently Gazprom and Lukoil don't really care about the domestic market. And then that actually affects the ability to harvest your crop in Russia. Like, this is crazy, you know? Like, I don't understand what's happening here. So, I don't know. Hopefully it all works out.
Bobby Kennedy's quote, which I quoted him on yesterday, was that for uh, I don't remember what it was now. It was for something like, for as much as we spend on the war in Ukraine, we could solve all the poverty in this country.
Oh yeah,
And that's the same principle, just writ large, that people just refuse to accept responsibility for making it happen. Why are people just such, as you say, in Russia, they just want stability. I'd
yeah,
say that we've been molded to the same standard here. We just want stability. And if we
yeah,
got stability from Joe Biden, then we're going to stick with Joe Biden.
yeah,
And it doesn't matter what he's doing with our future or with our biology or with our kids or with our everything. And throwing all that money into this whole of war is certainly part of what's happening, ultimately in the world economy. And of course, it costs a lot of fuel, a lot of gas and oil to run a war. I think every time you fly one of those jet planes, you're probably spending a thousand or two on gas. It's a huge investment in just spending gas and oil on military ventures. The trucks, the Bradleys, everything runs on ultimately uh, on fuel from hydrocarbons that come out of the earth. It's the same pipeline, and these guys are taking all the fuel. It's and that is the big situation, isn't it? That is the world is now run by a empiricist, a kind of a British Empire empiricism, or a British East India Company uh, cold morality based upon what does the what makes the more profit for the rich.
right. What makes the most money for uh, the stockholders, right? But the good news, John, is that we're getting rid of the stockholders, and now we're doing, what is it called? What is that? What is that Klaus Schwab phrase that he always uses now? Um, my brain is failing me. They have this new trendy word for, we're not stockholders, we're like, ah,
Stakeholders.
stakeholders. Yes, thank you, John.
Oh, you got
Right.
it.
So look, the stakeholders
Yeah.
understand that, Ukraine has great potential and we must bring democracy and freedom to Ukraine by helping to vaporize Slavs by the bushel, right? So, yeah.
Sounds like typical Transylvanian behavior. Yep.
It's a crazy world, John, but I totally agree. I mean, it's always, as someone I grew up in, I don't know if you know that I grew up in Santa Monica, California, which is, like Los Angeles, which at the time I believe was the homeless capital of the world. So you had obscene wealth, of course. And then you had these, Vietnam veterans or Gulf War veterans who are traumatized and have PTSD and drug and alcohol problems sleeping on the streets or collecting empty cans on the beach.
Hmm.
And it always, I remember from a very young age, I just never understood why I could live in a pretty nice house in Santa Monica, and it was somehow okay with all the adults around me that we would just walk by these people who were living on the sidewalk, right? And I just don't know. I feel like so many of our problems could be fixed if we just return to basic sort of child empathy, right? Like just sort of deprogram ourselves from this sort of cold-hearted pragmatism, which is really just cynicism, and try to be more human, right? So, like, instead of bombing each other, we could just feed each other, like very basic concepts, right? Which, of course, are considered crazy and irresponsible and idyllic, and this is unicorn crazy land. It's really not, though. It's like it would be such an easy thing to do, And it's just very surprising to me. Well, it's not surprising, but it's disappointing that we don't really have these discussions anymore, and I don't think there's any political will to even suggest this idea at any level. Certainly not in the United States, not in Russia. I mean, I guess the EU has some sort of semi-socialist thing going on, but they also have their own problems, and I don't know. It's just it's too bad, John. It's too bad.
Mm. Twitter's banned in Russia. And I was just about to think that, that Russia was innocent here because, you were saying, well, your travails were your fault. It wasn't, the evil commie, system that wouldn't let Riley back home into Moscow. It was the Russians weren't in your way. You just had some bad luck, bad advice, or, you just did something that kept you. It wasn't their fault. However, now you're missing from my Twitter feed, and I'm mad about that because I like to see you on Twitter. I'm on Twitter because I don't know how else to have any visibility.
Sure,
I
sure.
just want people to know when my next show is and what I'm talking about and make some comments here and there. But I agree with you. It is really turning into I mean, I use the block button all the time now. I don't want to
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
argue with anybody. I don't want to see your stuff. I just want really just let me do my thing and talk to people that I want to talk to, and don't
yes.
intrude on me with all this stuff that you're trying to push at me. And just block, block, block. That's what I have to do. People say don't block people. Well, no, you have to sometimes, especially when it's obviously some kind of business or some this campaign going on to try to find people like me and shut me down. Certainly, that is happening too. So it happens that you can't have a Twitter feed in Russia. That's a shame.
Yeah, look, I mean, well, okay, so I mean, to give an American example of being, for example, I was banned from PayPal. I can't use PayPal anymore. For thought crimes, right, committed
Yeah.
against pay. I don't know why PayPal would care what I think, but apparently they do, and they don't like it, and I can't use PayPal anymore, which actually is was very, very frustrating because I had people donating to me in PayPal. PayPal is actually a useful tool to use in some situations. Can't use PayPal. Uh, so it's everywhere, but specifically with Russia, and I really support this idea of we should try to be as nuanced as possible. I think that Russia does get a bad reputation because this idea that if you criticize the government in any way, that the FSB is going to come and put a bag over your head is simply not true. And I mean, anyone who reads my blog should know this because I'm constantly citing Russian media that's published inside Russia by Russians, and they're quite critical of the Russian government. In fact, a lot of the times, the articles that I cite are actually their wording is actually much more critical than what I'm actually saying. And so this is not true. This idea that there's zero free speech in Russia. At the same time, just like in the United States, just like in Europe, just like anywhere in the world, um, although there is a constitutionally in the Russian constitution, free speech is guaranteed. But of course, no one has free speech. It's just, what is that phrase? It's like, you know, um, anyway, the point here is it's this idea, the punishments and the when they come with the bag to put over your head, it's very arbitrary. And so does create a sort of sense of fear, and it has a chilling effect on free speech because although your free speech is guaranteed, although in general you can say mostly what you want, you never know if you're going to be targeted for arbitrary reasons. And in the United States, of course, they do the same thing, but for really stupid reasons, right? Like something that you said was interpreted as racist, and now you're deplatformed and you lose your bank account or whatever, right? And with Russia also, because of the conflict, of course, you can't call it a war in Russia. That's another interesting little tidbit. The conflict in Ukraine, because of the conflict in Ukraine, this arbitrary punishment system has become much, much worse. And there are documented cases of even small time journalists who are just reporting reality. Like, for example, there's this one guy, I forget where he was located, just in some I think like in some far off province in Russia, who just wrote a Telegram post about how Obman, which is sort of like Russian SWAT, like they're cops, were deployed to Ukraine to help fill in personnel gaps, which is true. But because he reported this, and because he said that some of them were killed and taken prisoner, he was charged with discrediting the Russian military. Why? Who knows? Who knows why? But like it's things like this. And then of course, you can point to Igor Strelkov, who of course has been much more, his criticism has been a lot more, let's say, provocative, but I don't know why that should be illegal. And I'm sorry, like whether you like Igor Strelkov or not, I think that he has he's speaking from a position of authority. I think he has the right to say what he wants to say. I think he has insight that is valuable to anyone, regardless of what you think about him. The fact that he was arrested allegedly for Telegram posts that he made is also very, very scary. And I do feel like increasingly the Russian government is tightening the screws, and they are making it much more difficult to just have an open, honest dialogue about issues that really matter. And again, it's not about, you know, I think that the best thing that Russia can do now is allow an open, honest, free discussion about what is Russia's future? What should Russia do? I think Russia has tremendous potential. It's a great country. It's a beautiful country with beautiful people. But if you're going to limit the the spectrum of allowed permissible speech, you're not gonna have. I don't think that that's the best way forward, right? You gotta hear everyone out, and so this is very worrying, and it makes me a little bit nervous, to be honest. But as for me personally, I'm not too worried. I feel like the Russian government wouldn't want to do anything to me just because for two reasons. First of all, I'm small potatoes. I'm a nobody, really. And second of all I'm doing is just basically presenting English language versions of things that are being said already in Russia by Russians. So why they would take, offense to this, I haven't the slightest idea. And I don't think they actually do. I don't think they even care. So I'm not too worried about myself personally. But unfortunately, I can't say the same for a lot of brave and honest and sincere Russians who simply want the best for their country. But like all of the governments in the world, of course, they don't like being critiqued. They don't like being told that maybe they did the wrong thing or that they should change course. They're very defensive, stubborn, uh, gelatinous blobs of corporate money and cynicism. So as I've always said, the problems facing Russia are not so different from the problems facing the rest of the world. We should remember that we're all pros and we're all in this together, John.
Not me, man. I'm not a pro. No, I'm a free
You're a
liberty,
free American.
free American
Uh,
male. Yeah, man. Yeah, and and I'm sticking to it.
I
Um,
respect that.
well, one last thing then, if we can get into this idea of an election coming up in April, and you mentioned that it was something, that could bring some tension. What who's opposing to Putin? Is Putin, I assume, running again? And what type of issues are going to sway the voters in this election?
Oh yeah, okay. So I just looked. It's March of next year. Sorry, this is
March,
my
okay.
my factual error. Yeah, March 2024. Well, as far as I know, I don't think actually Putin has. I mean, he is almost certainly going to run, but he hasn't actually declared his nomination yet, as far as I know. And as for his opponents, I don't know if anyone is even going to be running, to be honest, which doesn't look very good. But I don't know. Strelkov allegedly from prison, he had his lawyer like transcribe some note that was posted on his Telegram channel declaring his presidency, but I feel like that was sort of in jest. I don't know, John. What's interesting about Russia is that, you in the United States, you have this ridiculous two-party system, which is really a one-party system, and mostly it's just a one-party system, right? I mean, like, both sides are funded by Goldman Sachs. Both sides like bombing brown people in faraway countries that no one can find on Google Maps. Of course, there are aesthetic differences. They do have different policies on certain issues, but really, it's a political system that is that serves the rich and serves the powerful and serves the oligarch class. In Russia, you have a uniparty system, which is you have United Russia, which basically controls everything. You have this what's called the systemic opposition, which is supposed to offer. It's supposed to be sort of more radical than United Russia, like a little bit more populist, but always votes with United Russia on everything. And then you have, I mean, even the Communist Party, which actually has taken some very bold and brave positions in the last 3 years, especially with COVID-related restrictions and things like that. But they also almost always vote with United Russia. Like, nobody is voting against the Uniparty, right? So everyone is sort of part of the Uniparty. And if you're not part of the Uniparty, for some reason the elections never work out for you. So it's just like a much more, again, I'm not trying to knock the Russian system. I don't think it's necessarily in fact, in some ways it's more honest, I would say, than the American system. Anyway, the reality is that we live in this illusion of democracy where people have a choice in things. Nobody gets to vote on anything important, and when they do get to vote, usually it's like it's for deciding which dude from Yale gets to decide which country we're going to bomb next. It's like, who cares? I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it. Obviously, there's, like, with Bobby Kennedy, I mean, RFK Jr., I mean, I think he's a really interesting candidate. I love the fact that, I think that he is widening the overtone window, right? And I really appreciate and value that. But by and large, I mean, that's what American politics is. Russian politics is really no different. I don't even know what they're doing in Europe. I don't think anyone even knows who represents them in European Parliament. That's the really interesting thing. When I was in Czechia, nobody knew who their, member of European Parliament was. Nobody even knows how the EU is run. It's like this endless maze of bureaucracy. It's incredible. I think it's actually the most sophisticated totalitarian state is the European Union, like the most sophisticated empire ever created, because it's an empire. Nobody wants to acknowledge they live in an empire. Nobody knows how the empire functions. Nobody even knows who the emperor is. It's incredible. I mean, it's really, I mean, I without sarcasm, like, I'm impressed, and people are, like, generally pretty happy with the situation. So maybe that's the future for us all, is this sort of these unions with other states where nobody actually knows who runs anything. Nobody knows anything about anything. We get our, monthly check from the government to eat our, government issued beans, and that's our life. I don't know.
You're sounding like Klaus Schwab there, Riley. I'm a little worried about you. Yeah, you got to look out for this guy up here. He's sneaking into my set right here. He's the
Uh-huh.
Fabian turtle, and it says
Uh-huh.
that the
Right.
Fabian.
The Fabian Society, right? Yeah, very
They see
sneaky.
how they sneak up on you.
They sneak up on you, right? In
Yeah,
fact, I'm pretty sure, isn't the original logo of the original Fabian Society is a wolf and sheep covered in sheep's
yeah,
clothing. Yeah.
a wolf in sheep's clothing, and then
Yeah.
but then the turtle comes along, and above him is the legend. When we move slowly, but when we strike hard.
Yeah, well, I think that's the real empire building mechanism now, right? Of course, we're still dropping bombs on people just because it's profitable, but I think that the long game is definitely a Fabian game. So,
Yeah, I do too. Can I ask you one more question?
of course, please.
Donald Trump, and Vladimir Putin.
Mm.
It's constantly pushed at us that, there's this thing behind the scenes between Donald and Vladimir, and they're like, you know, they're working together. And Donald Trump is really carrying out Vladimir's wishes in this country. Is that on the radar screen in Russia at all? Do people think about Donald Trump as a potential, good guy or ally of Russia, or is American politics just completely obscure? How would you address that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in general, actually, Russians don't. They don't. Of course, they're aware of U.S. policy towards Russia and Russia's periphery, but um, I don't think they really pay attention to U.S. politics in any meaningful way. At least the average Russian, certainly not. That being said, I guarantee that if you asked the average Russian, would you prefer Donald Trump in the White House or Joe Biden in the White House, they would definitely pick Trump for the very simple reason that they're just thinking in Russia, terms for Russia's terms. And under Trump, look, I mean, it was a much more, I think it's fair to say, whatever you think of Trump, the policy towards Russia was, in general, much more pragmatic. And I think you could even say there were attempts to create some kind of reconciliation, between Washington and Moscow. And obviously, Russians are going to appreciate that. And they're less excited about, a president that is openly hostile to them. So I think that that's how most Russians would think about, the sort of Trump, Biden, uh, presidencies. That being said, it's just this idea, though, that right, this sort of RussiaGate stuff. It was sort of a running gag. It was a joke in 2016, 2017 in Russian media. You hear almost nothing about it anymore in Russia for the simple reason that people got bored of laughing at something so ridiculous and stupid, and Russia has moved on. I don't know what they're saying in the United States. I mean, I guess it's still going on. I guess they're even arresting Trump for whatever, defiling the sanctity of US elections, or I don't even know what that was all about. But again, it's like I'll tell you this really quickly. It was funny. The last time I was in the United States, I guess it was right after Trump was elected. So maybe it was like late 2016 or early 2017, and I was at a Mexican restaurant with some family members. It was like family and extended family. And look, John, I had maybe one too many margaritas. I had a little bit too much fun. And I started talking about how I was like, can you believe that people actually think that Donald Trump is an agent of Russia? Like, this is some sort of North Korea level bullshit. And everyone just went, my whole family are like super liberal, and they all just like deathly silent. And I was like, oh, I made a big mistake. I said a bad thing. I made a boo-boo. I just sort of quietly finished my margarita, excused myself from the table. You know, it's like you forget. Like in Russia, everyone was just laughing at it, and in the United States, it's like every day you're bombarded with 10,000 headlines about how Trump apparently is this, puppet, part of this master strategy to dismantle the United States or whatever. I mean, it's so interesting how you can live in these two separate worlds with two, and like what's considered acceptable or common sense or normal. It's like totally different, right? And this is something that is comes up again and again if you live outside the United States. Even if you live in Europe, you'll find that a lot what's considered common sense in the United States, maybe not necessarily so.
Well, a long time ago, and I think this is all plotted out in the halls of London and Great Britain, the MI6 and the Chatham House and the Tavistocks and all of these guys. They're sending us, the one message and you the other message, and that I think is how it's been worked for a long, long time. They that Churchill said there was an iron curtain descending across Europe, and now I feel like there's a kind of a dark veil that
Yeah.
you and I have been able to pierce a bit today, and that I thank you for, lifting up the veil so that we can see each other's perspectives. They don't want us to do it. They're
Right.
suppressing you. They're suppressing me. They're suppressing anybody that actually wants to extend their hand out and say, "Hello, I'm John. Can we just talk for a while?"
Yes.
But you took my hand, Riley, and we've been having a good time together and sharing a very interesting perspective from Moscow and from other places over the past year or so. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And please come back soon.
Thanks you again for having me on, John. And I hope we'll be back on soon. But also, I hope we can meet face to face in the United States in the coming months. It'd be so much fun.
Now, you're mainly on Substack now for people to find your work before we let you go, right? And give your address there.
It's edwardslavsquat.substack.com.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.